November 24th, 1991. Freddie Mercury had hours left to live when he made a request that shattered everyone in the room. They desperately wanted to help him, but it was already too late. This is the heartbreaking story of Freddie's final wish, the friends who tried everything to grant it, and why some dreams remain forever out of reach no matter how much love surrounds you. The bedroom at Garden Lodge was dimly lit, the curtains drawn against the afternoon sun that Freddie could no longer bear to see. Gathered around his bed were the people who had loved him most: Mary Austin, Jim Hutton, his personal assistant Peter Freestone, and his closest friend Dave Clark. They had been keeping vigil for days, watching helplessly as the AIDS virus ravaged the body of rock music's greatest performer. But what happened in those final hours would haunt each of them for the rest of their lives. The wish Freddie made wasn't about his music, his legacy, or even his physical comfort. It was something far more profound and heartbreaking, revealing a longing that had followed him from childhood to his final breath. This is the story of what Freddie truly wanted in his last moments, and why the people who loved him most couldn't give it to him. The final days. By November 1991, everyone close to Freddie knew the end was approaching rapidly. He had been battling AIDS for years, though he'd only publicly acknowledged his diagnosis the day before his death. The disease had taken an enormous toll. The strong, athletic man who once commanded stadium stages now weighed barely 100 pounds and could hardly move without assistance. Despite his deteriorating condition, Freddie had maintained remarkable dignity throughout his illness. He refused to be photographed, didn't want pity, and insisted on maintaining as much normalcy as possible for as long as he could. But by late November, even pretending things were normal had become impossible. Mary Austin had moved back into Garden Lodge to help care for him, sleeping in a room next to his so she could respond immediately if he needed anything during the night. Jim Hutton, Freddie's partner, rarely left his side, helping with the most intimate aspects of care with a tenderness that moved everyone who witnessed it. Peter Freestone managed the household and coordinated with doctors, trying to keep Freddie as comfortable as possible. But what they couldn't manage was the one thing Freddie wanted most, and you won't believe what it was. On November 23rd, the day Freddie released his statement confirming his AIDS diagnosis to the public, he had been unusually alert despite his weakness. He'd insisted on perfect grooming. Peter had carefully styled his thinning hair and helped him into clean pajamas. Even facing death, Freddie Mercury maintained his standards of presentation. But beneath that carefully maintained exterior was a man grappling with profound regrets. The conversation. The afternoon of November 24th started like the previous days had: quiet, punctuated by medical care and whispered conversations among those keeping watch. Freddie drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid and conversational, other times lost in morphine-induced haze that at least provided some relief from the pain. Around 3 p.m., Freddie woke more alert than he'd been in days. His eyes, still remarkably expressive despite his physical deterioration, focused on Mary Austin, who was sitting beside his bed holding his hand. "Mary, darling," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something." Mary leaned closer, squeezing his hand gently. "I'm here, Freddie. What do you need?" What Freddie said next would echo through Mary's mind for decades. "I wish I could see my father one more time. I wish I could tell him I understand now." The words hit Mary like a physical blow. Freddie's relationship with his father, Bomi Bulsara, had been complicated and strained for years. The traditional Parsi father and his flamboyant rock star son had struggled to understand each other, and though they'd maintained contact, there was always an unspoken distance between them. Now, with hours left to live, Freddie wanted reconciliation that had eluded him for decades. But here was the heartbreaking reality. Bomi Bulsara was in India, thousands of miles away. Even if they could contact him immediately, even if he could drop everything and board the next flight, he would never arrive in time. Freddie knew this. His friends knew this. And the impossibility of fulfilling his final wish hung in the air like a physical weight, and what happened next would break everyone's heart even further. The desperate attempts. Despite knowing it was likely impossible, Mary immediately sprang into action. She contacted Freddie's sister Kashmira in Nottingham, hoping she might have recent contact information for their father. Jim Hutton called Freddie's lawyer, thinking perhaps legal channels could expedite communication. Peter Freestone began making international calls, trying to locate Bomi Bulsara and explain the urgency of the situation. But every path led to the same dead end. Even if they could reach Bomi immediately, even if he could get on the next available flight, the journey from India to London would take over 16 hours. Freddie didn't have 16 hours. The doctors had said he had a day at most, possibly less. As his friends scrambled to find some way to grant his wish, Freddie seemed to retreat back into himself. He understood the impossibility of what he'd asked for, but that didn't diminish the longing. Brian May, who arrived at Garden Lodge after hearing about Freddie's deteriorating condition, later described the scene as the most helpless I've ever felt in my life. Here was this man who had given joy to millions, who had created some of the most beloved music in history, and in his final hours, the one thing he wanted was something none of us could give him. May recalled years later, his voice still heavy with emotion. No amount of fame or money or success could buy him more time to reconcile with his father. The root of regret. To understand why this final wish meant so much to Freddie, you have to understand the complicated relationship between Freddie Mercury and Bomi Bulsara. Freddie had been born Farrokh Bulsara in Zanzibar, the son of Parsi parents who held traditional values and high expectations for their children. Bomi was a cashier for the British Colonial Office, a respectable but modest position, and he raised his children with strict adherence to Parsi traditions and cultural norms. When young Farrokh began showing interest in music and performance, Bomi was supportive but cautious. Music was fine as a hobby, but the family expected Farrokh to pursue a stable, respectable career, perhaps as an accountant or lawyer. The idea that their son would become a rock musician, adopt a stage name, and live a life so completely divorced from Parsi traditions was unthinkable. As Freddie Mercury's fame grew throughout the 1970s, the gulf between father and son widened. Bomi struggled to reconcile the flamboyant performer he saw on television with the son he had raised. Freddie's sexuality, though never explicitly discussed, was another source of unspoken tension. In the traditional Parsi community, homosexuality was taboo, and Bomi's silence on the subject spoke volumes. But the relationship wasn't hostile. It was complicated by love that couldn't quite bridge the cultural and generational divide. Bomi was proud of his son's success, but uncomfortable with how that success manifested. Freddie loved his father, but felt perpetually judged and misunderstood. They maintained contact, celebrated holidays together when possible, but always with this layer of formality and distance that prevented true intimacy. The unspoken words. Throughout his illness, Freddie had apparently spent considerable time thinking about his relationship with his father. Friends recalled him mentioning Bomi more frequently in his final months, sometimes with nostalgia, often with regret. He talked about childhood memories in Zanzibar, about lessons his father had taught him, about the expression on Bomi's face the first time he saw Queen perform. I think Freddie finally understood that his father loved him, even if Bomi couldn't always show it in ways Freddie needed. Mary Austin reflected years later. And I think Freddie wanted his father to know that he understood, that he didn't hold the distance between them against him, that he recognized the cultural pressures and generational differences that made closeness difficult. But these understandings had come too late. Freddie had spent decades building walls between Freddie Mercury, the performer, and Farrokh Bulsara, the son. By the time he was ready to dismantle those walls, his body was failing and time had run out. And here's what makes this even more heartbreaking. There was actually one more layer to Freddie's final wish that he never got to express fully. The deeper wish. As the afternoon wore on, and it became clear that reaching Bomi Bulsara in time was impossible, Freddie made peace with the situation in his own way. He asked Mary to help him sit up slightly, and he began talking about what he would have said to his father if given the chance. He would have told Bomi that despite everything, despite the distance and misunderstandings, becoming Freddie Mercury was the right choice, Mary later revealed. But he also would have said that he wished he'd found a way to be both, Freddie Mercury the performer and Farrokh Bulsara the son. He felt like he'd sacrificed one identity to fully inhabit the other. This was the deeper dimension of Freddie's final wish, not just to see his father, but to show him that the boy from Zanzibar was still there beneath the makeup and costumes. That the Parsi values Bomi had instilled, loyalty, generosity, respect for family, had shaped the man Freddie became, even if the expression of those values looked different than Bomi expected. Jim Hutton remembered Freddie saying something profound during those final hours. I wish I could tell him that everything he gave me, I used. Just not in the way he imagined. It was a statement that encapsulated Freddie's entire complicated relationship with his heritage and his father, gratitude mixed with regret, love tempered by distance. The final hours. By early evening, Freddie had slipped into a semi-conscious state, the morphine easing his pain but also distancing him from the room and the people surrounding him. His breathing had become labored, and everyone knew the end was approaching rapidly. The wish to see his father would remain unfulfilled, joining all the other might-have-beens that follow lives cut short. But something unexpected happened around 9 p.m. that provided a small measure of comfort. Kashmira, Freddie's sister, had managed to reach their father in India and explained the situation. Though Bomi couldn't reach London in time, he had asked Kashmira to relay a message to Freddie. She called Garden Lodge and asked to speak with Mary. Tell Farrick that his father loves him. The message said, using Freddie's birth name. Tell him I'm proud of what he accomplished. Tell him I understand he had to follow his own path. Tell him I'll see him again in the next life. Mary leaned close to Freddie's ear and whispered the message. Though Freddie couldn't respond verbally, tears rolled down his cheeks. His hand, which had been lying limply on the bed, squeezed Mary's fingers with surprising strength. In that moment, thousands of miles of distance and decades of complicated emotions compressed into a simple exchange of love and understanding. It wasn't the reunion Freddie wanted, Mary later said, but it was something. It let him know that his father understood, that the distance between them hadn't destroyed their love, just hidden it beneath layers of cultural expectation and miscommunication. The end. Freddie Mercury died at 7 p.m. on November 24, 1991, just 24 hours after publicly announcing his AIDS diagnosis. He passed peacefully, surrounded by people who loved him, but without the face-to-face reconciliation with his father that he'd longed for in his final hours. Bomi Bulsara, upon learning of his son's death, reportedly collapsed with grief. According to family members, he spent days in mourning, repeatedly saying, "I should have been there, and I should have told him more often." The regret wasn't one-sided. Both father and son had wanted closer connection but had been unable to bridge the gaps created by culture, generation, and the particular complexities of Freddie's public life. The funeral arrangements reflected Freddie's Parsi heritage, a detail that meant a great deal to Bomi. Despite living as Freddie Mercury for decades, Farrick Bulsara was laid to rest according to Zoroastrian traditions, a final acknowledgement of the identity he'd never fully abandoned even when it seemed he had. The lasting impact. The story of Freddie's final wish deeply affected everyone who witnessed it. For Mary Austin, it reinforced the importance of saying difficult things before it's too late. She has spent decades since advocating for people to heal family rifts while there's still time, using Freddie's story as a cautionary tale about the cost of unspoken words. Jim Hutton, in his memoir, wrote movingly about those final hours and the lesson they taught him about the universal human need for family connection. No matter how successful you become or how far you travel from your origins, there's always a part of you that wants approval and understanding from where you came from, he wrote. Brian May has referenced Freddie's final wish when discussing the importance of authenticity and maintaining connections to your roots even as you evolve. Freddie showed us that you can transform yourself, become something extraordinary, but you never completely leave behind the child you were or the family that shaped you, May observed. For Bomi Bulsara, who outlived his son by 12 years, the final wish became a source of both comfort and eternal regret. Family members say he kept a photograph of Freddie on stage at Live Aid in his home until his own death in 2003, and he would sometimes speak to it, as if Freddie could hear. The message he'd sent through Kashmira, "I'll see you again in the next life," became his own source of hope as he aged. The lesson we must learn. Freddie Mercury's final wish teaches us something crucial about the human condition, that success, fame, and achievement cannot fill the void left by unresolved family relationships. The man who had performed for billions, who had created timeless music, who had lived an extraordinary life, wanted something heartbreakingly ordinary in his final hours: connection with his father. The tragedy isn't just that Freddie and Bomi ran out of time, but that they wasted so much of the time they had. The distance between them was built from small moments of withheld affection, unexpressed understanding, and words left unsaid. Each instance seemed insignificant at the time, but accumulated into a barrier that proved impossible to fully overcome before death intervened. But there's also grace in this story. The message Bomi sent, though it came too late for the reunion Freddie wanted, still provided comfort in his final hours. It proved that the love had always been there beneath the complicated layers of cultural expectation and personal choices. Sometimes, even imperfect closure is better than none at all. For those of us still living, Freddie's final wish serves as a powerful reminder. Don't wait until it's too late to bridge the gaps with people you love. Don't assume there will always be more time for difficult conversations or emotional reconciliation. Don't let pride, fear, or misunderstanding steal years of potential closeness that you can never recover. The wish that lives on. Today, when people visit Freddie Mercury's memorial at Kensal Green Cemetery in London, they're mourning a musical genius who changed rock history. But knowing about his final wish adds another dimension to that loss. We're also mourning a son who wanted to fully reconnect with his father before it was too late, a man who wanted to integrate all the parts of himself that had been divided by fame and expectation. The wish Freddie couldn't fulfill in life has become a legacy that teaches us about what truly matters at the end. Not the awards or accolades, not the money or mansions, not even the music that will outlast us all. What matters is love, connection, and the courage to be vulnerable with the people who matter most before time runs out. Freddie Mercury's friends couldn't grant his final wish, and that failure haunted them. But by sharing this story, they've given the rest of us something precious. A reminder to not make the same mistakes, to not wait for deathbeds to say what our hearts have always known, to build bridges while there's still time to cross them. That's the heartbreaking story of Freddie Mercury's final wish and why even love couldn't turn back time to grant it. If this story moved you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Mercury Moments family for more untold chapters from Queen's legendary frontman's life. Give this video a thumbs up if you believe in the importance of reconciliation and family connection, and let us know in the comments about someone you need to reconnect with before it's too late. Until next time, remember, tomorrow isn't promised, so say the words that matter today.